Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next panel, How Conspiracy Theories Capture the Mind, with Diane Benscoter, founder of The Antidote, Jacqueline Mason of the Media Democracy Fund, Abby Richards, TikTok misinformation and extremism researcher, and moderated by Ellen Cushing, projects editor of The Atlantic.
Hello, thank you all for being here. I'm going to start with a big question, which is, are we actually in a golden age of conspiracy theories? Or are we in a golden age of thinking and talking and worrying about conspiracy theories? This is for any of you. Jump in.
I think conspiracy theories are a part of human nature. They are very much like wired into our brains of how we process the world. So they are in no way, shape, or form new. I think that they are just receiving a lot of amplification at the moment, and we see that online on all platforms.
Yeah, I will agree with Abby. Conspiracy theories are absolutely not new. But one thing I really want to start with is I believe we have all at one time believed in a conspiracy theory, right? This is not something that is foreign to any of us. Also, with the current political climate, we've been through a hell of a last 3 years as far as the COVID-19 pandemic. When people have heightened emotions surrounded around things, Maria Ressa touched on this yesterday, almost not using their emotional skepticism, more prone to maybe believe something, right? That gets you excited, emotional, etc. So this is not new at all, but I would say the social media has exacerbated some of the problems that we have with the spread of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I would take a little bit different. I agree with what you've said. I would take a little bit different of a lens to look through it with, and that is the lens of manipulation. And it's on a psychological level that so many people are being manipulated by these theories, by these conspiracy theories, and that's because we live in a time of great social unrest. People are scared. People don't know who to trust. We've talked about that a lot during this conference. And what that creates is a lot of vulnerability on a psychological level for people to swoop in and manipulate people, sometimes to an extent of extremism, oftentimes to an extent of extremism these days that is really frightening.
On that note, Diane, I was hoping you could tell this group how you came to this work specifically.
So I was in a religious cult. Some of you may be old enough to remember the Moonies. And I was a Moonie for 5 years, and then my family had me deprogrammed. We talk in terms of radicalization and de-radicalization a lot today, and it's really the same thing. And over the course of a lifetime of helping people leave religious cults and different extremist organizations, that's what I've spent a lot of my life doing. What I've come to see is that it doesn't really matter what the doctrine is. It doesn't matter what the pack of lies is. What matters is that people can find community, they can find easy answers to life's hard questions. They feel better when they become part of this conspiracy theory. They feel better when they have a tribe and that they have an enemy to point to. And that's, I think, what runs through all of this disinformation is polarization. It's meant to divide, and it's meant to take advantage of people on a psychological level so that then you can weaponize them. It's really scary that people that are coming to my nonprofit now are exactly their family members. They have loved ones. Probably many of you in this room and are listening to this know someone who it seems like they've completely changed. They're not the same person anymore. All they talk about are these conspiracy theories, and it's really like joining a cult. And so hundreds of people are coming to Antidote, to my organization, and it's like a war zone. These people have such sad stories. They don't know how to relate to their husband or wife or their children or their elderly parents anymore because they spend 6-8 hours with this misinformation, with this disinformation, and it changes them. They become like a cult member. And so we need to build a solution at scale for that. It's a really dangerous situation.
To your mind, is QAnon a cult?
I think whether or not it's a cult is less important than whether or not tactics of psychological manipulation are being used to take advantage of people on that level, where the psychology, where people's emotions, feelings, decision-making processes take place. And so in that respect, absolutely. The people who come to me who have an affected person, a loved one, who is listening to QAnon consistently, really, it's the same story as someone who joined any cult, name a cult. It's the same psychological situation. So in that respect, yes.
Jacqueline and Abby, I'm curious what you make of this, this sort of framework that conspiracy theories are really about a kind of psychological lack and trying to fill some kind of emotional void.
Right. So those within communities of color, which is who I work with, have valid reasons to believe in conspiracies, right? We look at the history of medical atrocities committed against Black and brown people, and then you see they might have an adverse reaction to saying, getting a shot for COVID-19. Now we know that the vaccine is completely safe, but if you have this history, then you may not, want to do that. Also, the medical atrocities are continued in this country. If you go to any barbershop, salon, and church, you'll no doubt get a story of a person who was turned away for medical health care, who wasn't treated the same way as another person who came in for medical health care. We can even look at Dr. Susan Moore, who claimed, that she was mistreated based on her race and later died from COVID-19. So when you see something like that, you have a reason not to trust. There's no reason for people of color to trust the medical health institution. And I know a lot of doctors here are trying to rebuild that trust, but that's a main source. And it doesn't have to just be COVID-19. It can be a lot of things that have to do with the history of people of color within this country.
Abby?
Yeah, I'd completely echo what Jacqueline just said. So much of the conspiracy theories that I see aren't necessarily like intentional manipulation. They are born out of a lack of faith in the existing structures that we have that govern our world. They exist to challenge power. Now, they don't do a good job of that. Fundamentally, conspiracy theories really uphold the status quo. They tend to blame, all of our problems on a few bad apples, on this mysterious evil group, rather than actual systemic problems that we have. But they do pretend to challenge power, and they appeal in that sense, especially to people who feel powerless.
So we are at a conference about disinformation, and it seems like we all, and I agree too, that a lot of this is much, much deeper than an information problem. If it were just an information problem, we would have solved it a long time ago. But how much can we lay the blame for this, whether it's COVID vaccine conspiracies or QAnon or the next thing that pops up, how much can we blame big tech and the social media platforms for what we're seeing? This could be for anyone. Jump in.
Well,
go for it.
I think that they're vehicles. These are vehicles that are used. If you want power over others, if you want to control someone's decision-making processes, if you think of people as assets, if you're an authoritarian leader or a cult leader, it's really important to give people information about the other side and make them evil. That's what all of this disinformation is really at the heart of what it's doing, is divisiveness and creating an other, a them to hate. Much of the disinformation has that agenda. And so, yes, there should be guardrails around it. There needs to be this is a public health issue, and we need a public health approach to this. And if you look at a public health approach, what that means is there's pillars. You have to look at public policy. You have to have research and policy-driven efforts to look at the guardrails around these kind of things. You also have to look at what a lot of the journalists in this room have a platform to do, is to share information about how psychological manipulation works, how people are being taken advantage of by this. And then people can be more resilient to it. If we teach young people in school how to be more resilient to this type of manipulation, then the authoritarian leaders or cult leaders or whoever won't be able to use any kind of disinformation to control people. And so I think that's what's really important. And the third pillar is direct service sites. I mean, thousands of people have been radicalized. They're not just getting this disinformation and it's a bunch of lies. Yeah, that's true. But what's more important is that people are really being radicalized by this, and they're being weaponized. And that's a really scary thing to think about.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you've seen in your work through Antidote and sort of how people come to you and how you work with them?
Yeah, so they're almost always loved ones. People aren't knocking on our door saying, deprogram me, de-radicalize me. No, it's loved ones that are coming, and they don't know what to do about. A lot of times it's like their elderly parents who are, like I say, consuming this disinformation, these lies, 6-8 hours a day. They're like addicted to it. And it's the same way in as into a cult. You join it because it makes you feel better, because now you have a tribe and you have easy answers to life's hard questions, all that. And the way out is the same, is that people need to be, we call it deprogramming, or de-radicalization. It's really exit counseling. People need, at the heart of that, is that people learn to understand how psychological manipulation works. So we're creating workshops. We have workshops for loved ones to teach them basically how to have effective conversations with their radicalized loved ones, to teach them about psychological manipulation so that they can point to that instead of trying to convince them that no, vaccines don't have chips in them. That's not going to do any good. But if you can help them understand that there's a possibility you have been taken advantage of, that sacred part of you that wants to do good in this world, that wants to create a better world, that's what's being taken advantage of. If you can help someone to understand that they've been lied to, then they'll make their own decisions about how they want to view the world. Then we can have an actual democracy where people have differences of opinions. But if they're radicalized, and then you can't have a rational conversation with someone who has, as people say, drank the Kool-Aid.
Jacqueline, I know you've done a lot of work, going back to the disinformation question and sort of what platforms should be doing. I know you've done a lot of work about conspiracy theories and disinfo in languages that are not English. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that work.
Great, yes. And so circling back on the question about is big tech, is this their problem? Yes, of course it's their problem. They've allowed mis and disinformation to proliferate on their platforms for years. We obviously saw it with Stop the Steal. We saw that group grow in real time, researchers noting all of this really dangerous mis and disinformation. It was a little surprise when violence ended up happening, right? So as Maria Ressa even said, we're a month out from the election in the Philippines, and now Meta is saying, we're going to take down some pages. This is a very piecemeal approach. This is something that they always do, to where they take down a few different pages and say, okay, problem solved, we did our part. Meanwhile, I can still go online and find mis and disinformation about Maricopa County. I can find it about a black woman hiding votes under her table, which is untrue, completely been debunked. I can still find a myriad of conspiracy theories that we're talking about today. So the question is, what have we learned since 2020? I think that it's time to, hold big tech accountable through a variety of solutions. I work with the Disinfo Defense League, which is over 250 organizations combating mis and disinformation in communities of color. We have a policy platform where we want a healthy media ecosystem, and we're asking policymakers to hold big tech accountable through a set of policies which need to be enacted. And I can talk a little bit more also about, content moderation obviously is is something that's lacking. And though maybe it has gotten a little bit better in English language, we are now seeing so much Spanish language disinformation that is not moderated. A lot of Spanish language misinformation recently about the war in Ukraine, with no action, and researchers basically saying the same thing they were saying 2, 3, 4 years ago. So looking at big tech, and eye on them to do something, do the right thing, but also if it's just us out here, then we need to really think about what policies are going to change things.
And I'm so curious, like, is the Spanish language disinfo about Ukraine sort of the same as the English language disinfo, just in a different language, or does it have a sort of different political bent?
I mean, it calls on tropes about, communism, about, comparing what Putin has said about, Nazis within Ukraine. It calls on a lot of conspiracies about the country. I mean, it's doing that in English, but it really is on turbo drive in Spanish language.
So, I mean, that goes to Diane's point about how it's sort of like effective conspiracy theories sort of prey on people's existing anxieties and fears and, kind of psychological needs.
Yeah, also, in regards to the question about whether it's an information problem, I know that I said that this is a human problem, and it absolutely is. But when we are using platforms that prioritize keeping you on that platform for as long as possible, and conspiracy theories are a really good way to do that. They are inherently engaging. It's hard to look away from them. Even if you know they're false, a lot of the times you'll find yourself watching the entire thing. And that's the kind of thing that sends a message to the algorithm that it should show it to other people. And we see that happening all the time on TikTok. So when we have entire platforms that are built on the principle of keeping people on the platform so that they can consume more advertisements, so that stay on the platform and consume more and more ad space. It's setting us up for an ecosystem that's full of conspiracy theories. That's just the nature of them.
Abby, I'm so glad you brought up TikTok. You are our resident Gen Z member of the panel, and you are an expert on TikTok. And it's so interesting because I think TikTok has this reputation as sort of a kinder, gentler social media platform, teenagers doing wacky things with their bodies and the milk crate challenge. But can you talk about what you see in terms of disinformation, conspiracy theories on TikTok, and what are the kids consuming?
The children. Won't somebody think of the children? There is a common misconception that TikTok is just a dancing app. Just lip syncs, just dances, just memes, and that's really not at all what the app is. I mean, there are dances on there, but there's also a lot of information circulating, and sometimes it's really incredible information. There's great journalists on TikTok, and great educational creators on TikTok, but also, there is a lot of mis and disinformation, and we especially see that when it comes to conspiracy theories. I think partially because it's encouraged by the algorithm. They're inherently engaging. They're pretty easy. It's easy content to make. But also because the user base is young, and young people are statistically the most likely to believe in conspiracy theories. There's a misconception that it's just boomers, but really the prime age for believing conspiracies is about 14, which actually makes sense when you consider the 14-year-old is starting to think about the world more broadly, but doesn't really have a full worldview yet. So conspiracy theories kind of can answer those big questions with very simple stories. And we see that all the time on TikTok. Really huge conspiracy theory problem on TikTok. I mean, I analyzed just, I think, 5 different conspiracy hashtags, and they had over a trillion combined views.
That's a lot of combined views. What are the conspiracy theories? Is this COVID? Is this QAnon? Is it stuff I have not heard of?
Definitely stuff you haven't heard of.
Great.
They can get pretty weird. I think that inherent in a lot of the conspiracy theories that go mainstream popular on TikTok is this, as Jacqueline was talking about, this challenge to power, And I think a lot of those conspiracies do well on TikTok. So Illuminati conspiracy theories, New World Order conspiracy theories, lizard people conspiracy theories. Is Antarctica not real conspiracy
What? Wait,
theories?
sorry, can we pause on that one for a sec?
Oh yeah,
Is
I
that
see it
real?
all the time, yeah, that like, yeah, Antarctica isn't real, the government's made it up.
And how much of this is kind of trolling, and how much is genuinely not believing Antarctica is real? Sorry, I'm a little fixated on this.
I don't think it's trolling, because there's a difference when we think about somebody making an entire video and usually putting their face on it and speaking to the camera like selfie style, and somebody trolling in tweets. There's just a difference in what they're putting their face on, how they're building an audience this way. But no, like we have creators who have built audiences of millions of followers by pushing out these conspiracy theories. And I think part of it is as entertainment. A lot of it is, oh, what if this is true? I don't know, I'm just asking questions. And then there are people who, you know, feel pretty powerless, and these conspiracies meet those needs.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that the reason that countering the information with accurate information is oftentimes not very effective is that people want to continue to believe what they believe, because it makes them feel better. They like being part of this community. They like feeling self-righteous. They like being able to point to the academics and the people that they maybe have spent a lifetime being jealous of or whatever, and saying they're the problem, they're the enemy. And they like the idea that there'll be a new world order, that everything is going to crumble and they're going to end up on top. They like that concept. And so when you counter them with facts, and they can easily just say, well, that's big media, big pharma, big corporation, big anything feeding you lies, they want to believe that it's lies because they feel better in their group of conspiracy theory thinkers.
And I'd also like to bring up influencers and the monetary component to this. Like, this
Please.
isn't just for fun. Like, money is at stake. Money's on the table. They are making money by spreading these conspiracy theories with their platform. If it's not money, it's political influence, right? So that's why you see a lot of folks throwing their hat in the ring to get involved in these conspiracies to win votes or, you know, to make a profit. So this is another exploitative element of the business models of a lot of these platforms.
Yeah, that's so true. Also, it's just, it's more easy to go viral with that, right? So if you're a influencer who wants to make money through, you know, YouTube monetization or the TikTok Creator Fund, it's more profitable in some ways when you're looking at views to put out content that is not educational and does misinform people and does promote conspiracy theories than it is to put out high quality information that isn't going to get, like, it's going to get a fraction of the views that a conspiracy theory would.
And can we talk a little bit more about the mechanisms of that monetization for people who may not be familiar? We're talking mostly about people selling ads on their social media, right?
It's both. So there's really two ways that you would make money. I can speak as like a TikTok creator on this, but so on TikTok and YouTube, and I think Instagram is now trying to roll this out as well, but like there's a established kind of fund that goes to creators based on their engagement. They aren't super clear about how that's determined, but like let's say you have a viral video and you make a couple $100 or whatever, however much you make that month from your videos. And that's coming from ad revenue from the company. And then you could also do, you know, brand work outside of that and do promotional work. We see it a lot with like conspiracy theory influencers have a strange relationship with Bang Energy, where a lot of them are being sponsored by Bang Energy. You just see it in the background of their videos.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
And this would be, as Dr. Joan Donovan says, you know, deplatforming works. Once people start to lose a bit of cash, you might not see them as much, or they might be driven into fringe platforms. So that is a viable option as well.
One of the things I think that's important to understand is that because it feeds on people's emotions, and if anger is a key emotion, people are on, there's a spectrum of how deeply someone gets involved in these conspiracy theories and how how it becomes their identity. And if they start out with lots of anger towards the other, whoever the other is, then there's a real danger in that, because the kind of final stage of psychological manipulation is dehumanization of the other. And this is when maybe it'd be better if the other didn't even exist, is the ultimate kind of messaging that turns people into weapons. And this is how genocides happen, and this is how atrocities have happened throughout history, really.
So I want to, with our last 10 minutes or so, turn towards solutions. And I know, Jacqueline, you've been working on this a lot. Maybe we can start with you. Like, practically, what are the things we should be doing about this?
That's great, thank you. So this is a huge problem, and it can feel very daunting to talk about all of the mis and dis and mal and conspiracy theories and all of the words for how we define this problem, right? But there are people working on this problem, and one that I represent are civil society organizations within the Disinfo Defense League. The Disinfo Defense League, as I mentioned, it's over 250 organizations, communities of color working to combat mis and disinformation. We do this through a variety of ways. I brought up the policy platform a bit earlier that we do in cooperation with Free Press, but we also think about pre-bunking, inoculation efforts, and really training in best practices to understand and identify mis and disinformation. We look at how do we change the narrative about communities of color. Working with journalists is very important. I think that, as a brilliant job most journalists do, getting that information from communities of color who are working on the ground to headlines is sometimes a problem. There's a deficit in how we talk about folks in communities of color. There are people on the ground, advocates working on that. Same thing with research. We think about advocacy researchers and showing, how can we say the problems, the mis and disinformation that's flowing in communities of color about, election-related disinfo, COVID-19 related disinfo. I think that's, those are some of the measures that we're currently taking.
Yeah, I would echo the pre-bunking for sure is something that I personally do. And for those of you who aren't familiar, it's essentially like vaccinating against misinformation. So you would create a video or a piece of content educating people that a certain piece of misinformation exists or a certain tactic is used to spread misinformation, so that when they then encounter it in the wild, they respond to it almost as if they have like antibodies that have received a vaccination and they know how to respond to it. So I create videos that hopefully do this, intend to do this. It's definitely an area that we still need a lot more research in, and we need a lot more people working on. And then the other huge thing that I feel like we've touched on, but it can't be emphasized enough, is that it shouldn't be profitable. It should not be profitable to traffic in lies. It shouldn't be profitable to traffic in conspiracy theories, especially when so many of them are deeply rooted in hatred, specifically in anti-Semitism. And as long as platforms are continuing to make it profitable for people to do that, then we have a problem. But I think if we can work with the platforms to slow that amplification down and limit profit, that would be a great step.
And I would just say this is a public health issue. And if we don't address it in a public health way, we're just mole whacking. We have to create a public health solution to this. It's hard, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who doesn't understand that tobacco causes cancer, and that's because it was a huge public health effort to get that far. And this is a much more complex issue that we've all been grappling with throughout this conference of what is this thing, but that doesn't mean it can't be done. It must be done. We absolutely have to approach this with a public health solution.
And one last thing, while I don't want to put the onus completely on us, to have this solution, trusted messengers are so important when you're thinking about communities, especially within communities of color. Who are the trusted messengers? It could be, an actual influencer online, but often it's someone at the church, or it can be a trusted medical health professional if you've made that connection. So really what the Disinfo Defense League does is, we work together to identify mis and disinformation information, think about narrative, and think about how to talk to the people within our communities, our loved ones. You know, we don't get, you know, it can be a difficult conversation, and a lot of feelings can come up when you're speaking with folks about, you know, COVID-19 disinformation or anything that they feel passionate about. And you have to realize the person you're talking to, respect them, you know, and you can find solutions together. But, you know, doing that with people who are trusted is really key and very important.
I'm so glad you said that, Jacqueline. That is so important. And you know, trusted voices are really the most important thing in countering this. It has to come through people that people trust. We have to work with faith leaders, and we have to work with people like you that have, you know, a following, and your voice is really important. And yes, it's great to have something on one of these major news channels, or to have glossy, you know, videos that are countering the information. But if you're not speaking in the language of the people that you're trying to reach with voices that are trusted by those people, you're not going to make any difference, really.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. Like, I'm thinking of the TikTok White House briefing that recently happened and got a lot of attention, including an SNL cold open sketch.
For the people who don't know, can you explain?
So a group of about 30 TikTokers were briefed by the White House on the invasion of Ukraine. There was nothing said in the briefing that like they couldn't have read on the New York Times. Like there was no sort of, like no confidential information was given to them. And I also wouldn't say that they were like spoon-fed propaganda either. It was just a place for them to ask questions and have those questions answered, still through the White House lens, absolutely. So there was this briefing, and people reacted as though that were something, you know, ridiculous to happen, when in reality, like, we need more efforts like that. I co-founded an environmental collective of environmental TikTokers, and we use the scientists that we know to like help inform our videos. Like we know how to create engaging content that finds people where they are and like meets them where they're at, but we also need funding, right? Like we need to not have to sell ad space, which compromises our trust. And we need access to high quality information and experts to go to when we have questions.
So we're going to turn it over to questions in a little bit, but Jacqueline, you've mentioned journalists. I am a journalist. There are a lot of journalists in this room. Abby and Diane, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about like how journalists can cover conspiracy theories better. Like what should we be doing?
I think that journalists have such an important platform, and so you can educate people about the dangers of misinformation and disinformation. You can speak about the fact that there are people who will try to take advantage of you. There are people that will try to lie to you because they make a profit from it. People need to understand why and how this is happening. They need to understand that there's profit to be made and there's weaponization that is to be made. No one wants to play the fool. No one wants to be an ex-cult member, and no one wants to admit that they've been had. And so if we do it up front and teach people about how to recognize, like what you were talking about, Abby, is that journalists can do a better job of that, of educating the public about psychological manipulation, really.
Abby?
Yeah, I think that journalists are doing much better than they were a couple years ago when we had a huge amplification problem, and they were writing and covering about conspiracy theories and hate groups in ways that just gave them more oxygen than they needed, and that was often coming from white journalists as well, who have the privilege of not feeling as threatened by those groups and those beliefs and ideologies. I think that has gotten a bit better, but there's still room for improvement there when it comes to how we give attention to hateful narratives and hateful people and groups. And then I had a second point that will come back to me in a second.
I can fill in a little
sure.
bit. I guess, to that point, often, not always, newsrooms don't represent the communities that they're meant to serve, right? We saw during COVID-19 pandemic kind of a groupthink, right, for that lack of diversity, saying Tuskegee could be a reason not to get vaccinated. But in reality, when you're talking to people, a distrust of the vaccines, how quickly they were formulated, right? A distrust of, one type of vaccine in a different community. Access, at a time there was, people going from other communities and taking up all the vaccine appointments, or a time you could get off of work to go and get a vaccine, or a time you could go across town in a bus to get a vaccine. That doesn't mean people don't want to be vaccinated. And to draw on something like conspiracy, like Tuskegee, which was a very large trauma for Black folks, it still wasn't right? And that's that lack of diversity showing up, and that will show up with other things that emerge. So I think that diversity is really important. If you don't have it in your newsroom, there's advocates, as I mentioned, working on the ground who can let you know what's truly happening.
And trusted voices again. Bring on the trusted voices onto your news shows. Bring on the people that the community trusts and hear their voices more.
Yeah, and one of the benefits too of just including more diverse voices in journalism is that when it comes to covering conspiracy theories, you also don't want to just say this is fake. Like, that should not be the end of the coverage. And I think that when we look at how we should be understanding the world, it should be through that framework of like ecological literacy. Like, how, not just like, is this conspiracy true or not, but also like, what purpose is it serving?
Yes.
Why does it exist? What source of power structures is it upholding? I think that framing it in a larger context and understanding the actual harm that it causes and going into that is worth
And
covering.
who's benefiting from it.
Right,
Really.
who's making money.
Yeah.
We're going to turn it over to questions. There are some people in the crowd with mics who will come find you. I'm like blinded by these lights, so I can't call on people, but feel.
Hi.
Oh,
Hi. My name is Caitlin. Thank you all so much. So there's been a question about how much of the onus is on the technology companies. I think at like an algorithmic level for spreading disinformation, but I'm wondering if you all have thought about how much onus is on the tech companies at a psychological level for creating this environment where people might feel more isolated than they used to. And I haven't done research on this, so I don't know if that's accurate, but I'm just kind of like hypothesizing if we live in a world where people individually feel more isolated and disconnected because although they're online, they're still like physically by themselves, then that seems that it would also create a better environment for the conspiracy theories to subsist in people's minds. Thanks.
I could start off, being on lockdown and then, many of us working from home did not help. If you're constantly inundated with this kind of information over and over again, you will have more of a tendency to believe it. If you are in groups where you feel like you have camaraderie, that can give you a sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. And I think that we'll touch on that more. But,
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And a lot of the people that come to my organization for help talk about how many hours people spend alone with their computer, and a lot of times it's a real cross-section of people that are doing this, and there's been the isolation of the pandemic and just the changes that technology has done in the world. People get their information differently than they did a generation ago, by far. And so people look for places where they can feel better, where they can feel more stable. And so if they find a group that is echoing kind of their concerns, their fears, their anger, they just go deeper and deeper and spend hours and hours and hours and hours, unprecedented numbers of hours on the internet consuming these conspiracy theories and validating what they already feel, the anger, the racism, whatever it is they already feel.
Next question.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. I wanted to get back to something that you said about how one way to sort of off-ramp people is to explain where these conspiracies come from, who's behind them, who's funding them. And it's kind of stunning to me that in this conference so far, we haven't heard anything about super PACs and the role that super PACs have played in creating some of this content in a way that's undigestible or unrecognizable to the average American. I was just kind of wondering if you've done any research, if you have any insight on how the influence of dark money is fueling these conspiracy theories. Thanks.
That's a good question. And it is so hard to tell a lot of the times. So like I can speak specifically to TikTok conspiracy theories. And a huge issue on TikTok is that when people are being paid by marketing firms who are trying to run some sort of political campaign, there is oftentimes no disclosure of that. So we've certainly seen that like around influencers who are connected to Turning Point USA, and we don't know exactly what that money looks like. Now on like the climate change side of things, there is a bit more research into that, and we have seen how like conservative think tanks have been fueling climate change disinformation and conspiracies that surround it for years. So like it just kind of depends which area you're specifically interested in. So it's a mixture of like yes and also we don't know.
Next question.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here. I've loved everything and all the work you're doing to kind of shut off the faucet of disinformation. And what I find really interesting is inherently you're all talking about belief, right? How do you make it so that people don't believe things that are inherently wrong and harmful to themselves or to others? And my question is really, the first part is you have to shut off the faucet, but then there's still, like the mess on the floor. And how do you stop this disinformation that already exists, that people already believe, from turning into things that are violent, that are actual crimes, that go beyond kind of the harm, like just the negative harm to people who believe that, but into harm to the greater society?
Well, I could start off. I mean, I think Maria also said this, Maria Ressa, yesterday, that if you tell a few people something at a party, it doesn't mean that you're telling, thousands and thousands of people this really harmful information. So I will just take it back to, getting on my soapbox and really talking about shutting off, what the platforms are currently doing as far as, their algorithmic amplification and many of their exploitative business models that really need to be changed. I think that's the only way to have something not devolve at the scale we saw with the Capitol insurrection, and some other things that have happened all over the world, right? So that would be a solution for me.
Yeah, and I would also say that on a big picture, addressing the sense of powerlessness that they feel that leads to making these beliefs so sticky is a huge component of combating it and addressing it now, is that we have people who, feel so disenfranchised that they'll easily turn to these sorts of beliefs. And honestly, it makes sense. Like, they don't see how they can actually create change in the world. That's why, so many young people, right, are gravitating towards these conspiracy theories that seem to challenge power but really don't. We have to be showing them and helping them to understand how they could actually change the systems so that they don't just have to sit there and be like, oh, these aren't true, and you just need to accept the status quo.
And I'll talk about cleaning up the floor. And that is that once somebody has gone deep into a conspiracy theory and been, for all intents and purposes, radicalized, it's really hard to use rational thinking to de-radicalize them. And so teaching family members, loved ones, how to have more effective conversations with them, how to have more empathy for them, because that's the first step, is to understand why this was so compelling to them. What valid reasons did they have to find this interesting? What are they getting from being in this? And then when you're helping them to realize they've been lied to, you have to have a lot of empathy for them then as well, because the recovery path is not easy. This has become your identity now. And now that's all falling to the floor. If this is not true, then who am I? Then what do I believe? Then now I have to grapple with complexity again And I wasn't that happy before. That's why I got involved in that. Now who am I? Now what am I going to believe? So there's a lot of recovery, and there's a lot of need for direct services to help all these people that have fallen prey to this. It's a big job.
I think we have time for one more.
We have a question from Christina, who's watching. How can everyday people participate in inoculating and pre-bunking conspiracy theories?
That's a great question.
Don't do something you're not trained to do. Please.
Say more.
I think that I see this a lot is people who feel very passionate about this and want to get involved, but don't know what they're doing. And a lot of the times, that is what leads to amplification. I would not, if you really want to get involved with inoculation methods and creating content that's educational, then that's a career path, and that's something that you could certainly learn more about and try to get into. But I wouldn't say that everyday people should be creating that content or posting about it. Now, if you see it, if you see a video like mine or one of my friends who maybe is debunking some sort of vaccine misinformation or pre-bunking information, share it. By all means, amplify it. But I don't think that I would not encourage untrained people to go combat something that is also, it's potentially quite dangerous.
Can you talk a little bit more about the danger of amplification and sort of how that happens, and what is what are kind of the failure modes for untrained people trying to take this work on? Yeah.
So really, for something to justify coverage, it has to already have reached a pretty big audience. You might notice, if for my videos, I won't really talk about something unless it has already reached millions of people, unless it's a major narrative that a lot of people have been exposed to. That's the only reason I would address something specifically and name it. I'm also very careful to not really name people and not ever link people back to the original source of something, not give them keywords that they can be Googling. And for instance, at the early beginnings of QAnon, when people Googled adrenochrome, which is, you guys know?
we can skip over that.
It would direct them to QAnon information. So a lot of the time, if you're not careful about exactly the wording that you're using, you might just be pushing people to go Google something and then get pushed into that conspiracy theory and believe it more. So yeah, that's a huge problem. Also, sometimes you're just amplifying other people who want their face out, right? There's a reason I don't talk about Alex Jones. I don't want to give oxygen to people who, quite frankly, don't deserve it.
So inoculation and pre-bunking does work, but I agree. You really have to understand how these narratives are moving online. We've seen as researchers, as people who work in the field, a lot of narratives say something about Black Lives Matter. We've seen this before. Now we want to prepare our community on what to expect on a narrative that's existed for years, and even if you go back to the history of Black movements, even longer. So that's how we inoculate. You don't want to end up just picking something that, the trumpet of amplification, or it's in a closed space on the web that you saw it, and now you've brought it to TikTok, and you have a big platform. That could be a real problem. And I think that a lot of people have really good intentions. This is when we talk about misinformation. Infographics, especially on Instagram and some of the other platforms, are really rife with misinformation. I feel like the people are genuinely trying, but they are, please don't share infographics. If I can say one thing before the end, it's that. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about prevention, it's really educating people about human vulnerability to being taken advantage of on a psychological level. And that's a big lift, but it can be done, and it has to be done in a variety of different ways, including curriculum and training mental health practitioners about this, and just public education about getting this concept out there that this problem exists, and kind of starting to point to that aspect of it.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you all.